If you want to win your fantasy football league, you have to build the optimal fantasy football roster and you have to kill your draft. And a lot of times you just go in and draft the most random guys. I'm going to draft this guy. I like this guy this year. This guy, I heard somebody tell me to draft. Nathan told me that that guy was a good guy to draft. And we have boiled it down to when you're building a fantasy football team, there are 4 factors that you should consider when drafting. If you nail these 4 factors, you will build a fantasy football team that will at very minimum be in the playoffs, if not have a bye, and you will be in contention for a championship. We've come up with algorithms for each of these. They're mathematically calculated using some guys from our data team as well. And so I want to talk to you about these 4 factors today, and we're going to go through all of them and talk about how you can optimize your draft strategy based on them. And so I want to give you a high-level overview of the 4 factors here, and then we'll talk about how to draft with these to make sure that at the end of your draft, you're scoring extremely high in all of these categories. Let's talk about the first one, upside here. Can this team explode? That's the question that this is answering. Again, it measures big playability, breakout potential, high ceiling players, and also stack/tier breaking combos. And basically the question that this one is answering mathematically is how many points is my team capable of scoring on a week-to-week basis? You have to have guys in your flex spots that can score 20-plus points on a given week. And so an example of this, right? When looking at upside scores for some of the guys that we have in our algorithm, you look at a guy like Travion Henderson. He's got an extremely high upside score, right? He does have that 20-point upside, and he's being drafted at flex position prices right now. Isaiah Pacheco does have that 20-point, any given week upside. Xavier Worthy has that 20-point any given week upside. And so all of those guys, when you're looking at the player database in our algorithm, you'll notice all of these guys have super high upside scores, right? Some guys with low upside scores here at different positions. Guys like Aaron Jones and Brian Robinson are super low upside. They're not going to have those 20-point per game weeks, right? You're going to have guys like Michael Pittman at wide receiver and Khalil Shakir. They're not going to have those 20-point boom weeks. I know Shakir had one last year, but outside, occasionally it will happen. But they're generally going to be guys that when you're calculating, really using mathematical techniques on their game-to-game production, they're a lot less likely, or they do it a lot less frequency than other guys in terms of scoring 20 or more points. And so upside is important. The more guys you have on your team that can drop 20-plus, the better shot you're giving yourself. And you can have guys that can score 20-plus points on your fantasy football team that don't necessarily have a low floor to go with it. You don't have to draft boom or bust players only. You can draft guys, again, that have not bad floor scores, but also have high upside scores. And so again, winning your fantasy football leagues at the flex position is really important, but it's high upside flex positions. That really is the key. So if you're able to nail in your flex positions on your fantasy team, what's the 1 flex league, 2 flex league, and grab guys there that have extremely high scoring week-to-week upside, make sure that your fantasy football team as a whole, your roster portfolio as a whole, has the upside score to contend in the playoffs and to win any given week, especially in your flex spots.
Yeah, and then you have floor, and it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, how good are your bad weeks, right? For any player at any position, how good are your bad weeks? How reliable are you when you don't score a touchdown? How reliable are you when you don't get 50 receptions a week, right? How reliable are you when you have a tough matchup against the Steelers defense and you only get 5 or 6 targets? What are you doing with those targets and those opportunities at the wide receiver position, right? So this one, again, you're going to see, we're going to kind of practically break this down, but like Josh Jacobs is a huge example of this last season, where I remember drafting him in the Flock League, and it was driving me crazy that he couldn't get the ball in the end zone through the first third of the season, but he was never losing me a week because of his volume. He was getting like 10 plus points a game, even without those touchdowns, right? James Cook is kind of the polar opposite, right? Where if he was getting touchdowns, and that was a lot when he was getting touchdowns, he was having good weeks. And his bad weeks, when he didn't score touchdowns, because his volume was kind of all over the place and his receiving upside wasn't like that consistent, you had some really, really bad games from James Cook. And then like at wide receiver, again, this is what separates good from great at the wide receiver position. This is why your top 12 guys at wide receiver are your top 12 guys, because any given week, because of their consistent volume and opportunity, they're going to be productive. But then the further down you go from like 13 to 24, you're looking at some of these guys like Xavier Worthy, who has a ton of upside, but you don't really know what he's going to do on a week-to-week basis here. Is he really going to be reliable for you? Can you really trust guys like Juwan Jennings, who people are interested in this season? Can you trust Devonta Smith, who is going to average 15 points per game across the entire season when he's healthy? But when you really look at those individual games, it's like 30 or 5. So those are more of your flex options that we're going to be looking at. And again, depending on their price, is it going to be is it going to be worth selecting them at price? Or are you going to have to rely on them every single week to a point where they're either going to screw you or they're going to win you a week, and you're going to end up 500 and you probably get knocked out at some point in the playoffs because they can't do this consistently every given week.
Okay, so the next factor here is going to be the depth factor. Will my team survive the entire season? Because depth, it really is the insurance policy for your fantasy football team. But it is possible to have too much depth, right? If you are sacrificing all of your high upside players, especially like in a... Did you get it?
What is it up? What's up with fantasy?
What's
up with fantasy football and me killing spiders?
Nathan's killing spiders during my segment. You can have too much depth. If you sacrifice your high upside guys, especially in like start 7 leagues, especially in like 10 team or 8 team leagues, and you try to get a bunch of depth, there is a real possibility you have too much depth there. Depth isn't necessarily going to do a lot for you because, again, if you have too much depth, you can't start the guys on your bench, right? You might as well consolidate and get some of those high upside guys in your flex spots, right? But you're always an injury away from losing your league. You always are. And so having insurance for some of those top guys, and I'm not just talking about handcuffs here. I'm talking about diversification into other offenses, but it could be handcuffs as well. Look, depth is relative. It depends on league size. It depends on league settings, things like that. But make sure you're set up for the entire season by making sure that you're not going to fall out of contention with a single injury. Meaning this, if you draft 8 guys to start, once you get to the 9th through 12th round in your fantasy football draft, don't go drafting guys that are just upside shots, that have no role in their offense that you're just like, I think I'm going to hit. I'm going to take 3 or 4 shots on guys. No, draft guys like Jacoby Myers. Last year, Jacoby Myers was a great example. He was going like 9th, 10th round. I took him in the flock league. And what happened? I was flexing him come championship week because I had injuries, right? And what happened? Jacoby Myers helped me win a league last year. I was drafting guys like DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins, I didn't end up starting, but there were times last year he was flexible. And so a lot of times I get in later in these drafts and I'm like, okay, I'm actually going to draft guys that I know are going to have a role and are going to score at least some points. Because again, it is the insurance policy. You will have injuries during your fantasy football season. You will. And so drafting a deep team, again, knowing your league settings, knowing how much depth you have to have, that's the key. Yeah,
so with risk, again, very self-explanatory. What is your risk portfolio across the board on your team, right? If you're drafting CMC in the first round, the late first or the early second, chances are you're probably not going to want to draft Nico Collins with Christian McCaffrey. I mean, that's an all or nothing strategy. And again, if you're in multiple fantasy leagues and you want to put that pairing together or whatever, like that's fine. We're just going to tell you in general, that's not something that we're going to highly recommend for people. We want to make sure that we are balancing our risk with safety as well. So you've got to know, what are those high risk and low risk players that are available on the board when you're drafting, right? CMC, I just mentioned. Nico Collins, another guy who's very high risk. T. Higgins, I think a lot of people are kind of experiencing or going through like the high of T. Higgins and how good he was last season and how much he exceeded expectations because his expectations were a lot lower than they'd ever been in the past. And now he's being drafted back to where he was previously. And we forgot that, hey, he missed 4 or 5 games last year and he's going to miss about that number of games every single year because he just gets a little banged up. And again, if you can account for that, if you can compensate for that by getting some safer options in the later rounds, it's okay taking T. Higgins at price, but make sure that your guys like Bucky Irving are a really good shot in the second round. He is very low risk in general. He's the only running back aside from like Bijan Robinson at number 1 who has a risk score of 1. Of like your relevant running backs that you're really looking to start every single week. It's a pretty crazy fact right there. JSN also going to be pretty low risk. Zay Flowers, we've also mentioned in videos in the past. His upside going to be a little shaky in terms of like, is he going to drop 29 or is he going to drop 8 to 10? He will drop 8 to 10. And again, as a flex option who you're drafting in the 6th round, that's pretty nice to pair with some other guys like Nico. If you're going to draft him in the first, he might miss a little bit of time every single season. So make sure we're balancing that risk with some safety.
And so again, these 4 factors will combine to not only give you the best idea of what your team build is after your draft and in the season as you continue to go on. Your depth score might start creeping up, and then it's like at that point you're making a 2-for-1 trade. Your risk score might start creeping up, and you might need to offload a risky player for a safer player. And so these are things that will help us throughout the season analyze our fantasy football team. But you can also look at this on a player-to-player basis, right? And so when you're looking in the algorithm, we have a full player database of everybody that's being drafted this year. We have their upside floor and risk scores. And I've used this so much in my drafts because it tells me a lot of things. First of all, one of the reasons that we've securely ranked Saquon Barkley behind Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan is they have the exact same floor and upside scores. But Saquon has double the risk those guys do. That's an easy ranking decision for us, right? We can look down the list here and see guys later in these drafts that have, for example, Joe Mixon stands out because of the high floor and high upside scores, but his risk is super high, right? When I'm looking at guys in this range here, Devon Achane, Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, and Josh Jacobs, what do I notice? Why is Bucky Irving the best pick there probably? Yes, he doesn't have as high of upside as Devon Achane. Yes, he doesn't have as high a floor as Kyron Williams or somebody like that, but he does have an 8, a 7, and he has a 1. He is a very safe pick. And so if I have a riskier pick in the first round and I have to go running back second round, I need to take safety. I'll take Bucky Irving there, right? So when you're drafting, we're actually using these things. And again, you can pick out best values or worst values by these things. You look at guys, if you go down the list here, a lot of times what I like to do is just go down the list and be like, okay, who down here has a super high floor when I'm getting to depth guys? David Montgomery has a high floor. Tony Pollard has a floor score of 8, right? Who down here has a ton of risk? Isaiah Pacheco has a ton of risk. Bashal Tutin has a ton of risk. J.K. Dobbins, Ramondre Stevenson all have a ton of risk. And so this is just helping me find later round values. It's helping me evaluate players on 3 different bases where, I think these are the things you need to keep in mind when you're evaluating players in fantasy football. We have all this available to you guys. We use it all the time in all of our drafts. And so there's also, platform, draft pick, cheat sheets, 10-team, 12-team. We've got you completely covered with the algorithm. You can get the algorithm with the season pass with code DOMAIN. Again, if you use code DOMAIN, create an account, and then subscribe with the season pass, you get everything on the site for the entire year. So all the start sit, all of the rankings, all of the tools, free trade questions, free start sit questions. You're also going to get in a league with Nathan and I if you want to, and draft live on the channel. And you get the algorithm in all of its beauty. And so this is, a little bit more of a strategy video here, but this is how we're looking at fantasy football this year with our new, and shout out to our data team, shout out to Eric, shout out to Tom, shout out to Kyle, shout out to all those guys on our team who helped us perfect this, especially Eric. Eric worked the most on this, and so he deserves a lot of credit, but we've got smart people working on this. Some would say the smartest people, and a lot of people would say that. A lot of people say. I think it's really paid dividends, and so make sure you drop a like and subscribe for those guys especially. We have a great team. We really appreciate all their hard work, but we will be integrating all these 4 factors into everything we do this year, and so you're going to hear a lot about it. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you later.